All right, thank you. We will call the meeting of the Fredericksburg Area Metropolitan Planning Organization to order. Please stand if you can for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Play ball. All right, Ms. Tuzell, will you please call the roll?
Yes, I will. Mr. Jason Graham.
Here.
Matthew Kelly.
Here.
Mr. Tim Baruti. Mr. David Brown.
Here.
Ms. Meg Bonke. Here. Ms. Monica Gary.
Here.
Ms. Crystal Lanucci.
Here.
I said stay here for me. Ms. Pamela Young.
Here.
Mr. Daryl English. Mr. Tim McLaughlin.
Here.
Mr. Chris Yakubowski.
Here.
Mr. David Ross.
Here.
Mr. Kevin Marshall. Ms. Deborah Frazier. Ms. Lori Hayes.
Here.
Ms. Marcy Parker.
Here.
Ms. Michelle Shropshire. Here. Dr. Bob Snyder.
Here.
Mr. Joe Swayze. The roll has been conducted and a quorum is met.
Thank you very much. At this time, we will ask for public involvement. Comments and questions from members of the public are welcome at this time. Staff will also read comments submitted by the public prior to the meeting. Is there anyone here from the public who wishes to speak at this time? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Freya Larkin, and I live in Celebrate Virginia community, which is right off 17 in South Stafford. And I'm here with 3 other residents, maybe one other to say something to you all. We've taken a close look at the study that was done for the roadways. That would actually, one of the big recommendations from that I saw was was to take a bridge to use Celebrate Parkway and to use that to gain access to a bridge, another bridge over the river, across the Rappahannock River. It would go into Central Park, but it would also, it looks like, connect as well to I-95 on the south side of the river. We know that there's a lot of congestion problems in the area. We've been dealing with them, but we just want to be sure that you all know that you take a really good close look at the route that you're suggesting in this report. I know that the 4-lane parkway is very tempting because a cost of building a new road would be lessened, and it looks like such an obvious solution into the library in Central Park on the other side of the river. The huge increase in traffic on Celebrate Parkway would, however, be devastating for our Celebrate by Del Webb community. We have about 1,600 senior citizens that live there, and this is over 1,100 homes. Celebrate is actually in 4 sections with 5 entrances onto that parkway, and we use the parkway every day. And with the parkway, we use the parkway to go to the lodge. This is where we have all of our amenities. We don't have any stoplights there right now. We're able to get along without it, but I can tell you we've been fighting to get a roundabout up further up the Celebrate Parkway to prevent accidents coming down Banks Ford Road, and we're having a lot of problems getting that roundabout to help improve our safety. So I can imagine what would happen if this road gets turned into an access to a bridge across the way. We are by proffer a gated community. There are gates installed at all 5 entrances along the parkway, and it's expected they soon will all be active. There's room in each gate for 2 to 3 cars before traffic will be backed up on the parkway waiting to turn. Additional traffic, including possibly truck traffic using the parkway to avoid I-95, will make this area a disaster and unsafe. There's also other new communities and other new apartments that are along there as well. There is an option, if you wanted to look at it, to instead of using Celebrate Parkway, to use Green Bank Road, which would come down the other side and hook as well into where the old golf course was. There are fewer houses on that. Most of the houses are set back, and I hope you will consider that if this has to go through. I, for one, would like to see a bridge further west to get rid of all those trucks.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else who wishes to speak at this time?
Mr. Chairman, if I could please, I just have a few comments. My name is Joe Bonds, and I too am a Celebrate resident, and I live at 64 Mendota Way, and I've got a couple items to talk to you about, and one of them is specifically item 8B, which is a call for projects updates. And on that, if you look at that, there's 27 submitted projects. And one of them is for a study for $200,000 for the I-95 crossing, or it's entitled the River Crossing Study. And I'd ask for your consideration to delay this for a year or two. And my reason for that is that being a resident out there, I've seen a tremendous change in traffic in the last year or so, simply due to all of the work that's ongoing right now at the I-95 Warren and the interchange. And especially with the dual, or where you can take 2 lanes off of Warren and off of 17 now to get onto I-95. I think things have changed there. And I think to do this right now, to do your study right now, is based upon old data before Wyatt VDOT and everybody did all their work there. And so I think, you're a little bit premature, Ian, sorry about this, but I think data would change enough with all the changes, all the money that VDOT has done to improve the through rates out there. They're working on improving the I-17 interchange, that really could perhaps drastically change some of the data. And so my concern is just delay it for a year, figure out how traffic goes, and then look at whether or not this is needed, and if so, when. So that's my first concern. My second concern is related to item 8C1. And that is, if you look at, it's the East-West Mobility Study Phase 2. And if you look at all of the alternatives, it shows on and off ramps for I-95 to the river crossing there. And I think that if you do that, basically, you're just making a shortcut for any truck or any people going down 17 towards I-95 to cut through, celebrate, and get down onto I-95, especially truckers. I think what you'd be doing there is making a truck route. And so I would ask you as a committee to specifically say to the firm that's doing the study, if you don't delay the study, if the firm's doing the study, to look at an alternative that doesn't include the on and off ramps.
That has been 2 minutes, if you'd like to continue.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So that's already being done?
No. It's the time for the per comment.
Yeah. And I only say that, would be a lot less expensive. It wouldn't, I think the neighbors, the whole area out there wouldn't be as concerned as if we continue on the way we are doing right now, with perhaps building a major truck road through a neighborhood that's not been planned for.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. Do we have any other comments from the public? All right. Hearing none, do we have any submitted? No.
We did solicit and receive the lady's alternative route. We got a map from her. We're very grateful for that, and will certainly be considered. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And appreciate you submitting or circulating that among the members of the policy committee. Thank you.
Chair, can I go jump back real quick and so I can approve the agenda?
Oh, did we skip that? We sure did. Thank you.
Move agenda as submitted.
Second.
Motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. It's been already been an evening with the GWRC meeting immediately preceding this. All right. Now moving on to the consent agenda.
Move consent agenda as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Moving on to the administrator report. Mr. Olds.
Thank you very much, Chair. If you could just pull up the slide for me, thank you. Not on the agenda. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay. Very good. So next slide. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just got very few slides for you today just to talk about congestion policy at FAMPO, some project selection we might need to do soon, and this discussion of the new river crossing. I'd just like to update you on some things. So this is just a funny roadway capacity increases. Let's talk about congestion, all right? Can't wait for the road to be widened. Finally, it's widened, but it's still full, right? So where do we go? Next slide. This relates to the roadway report that you just heard some public comment on, which you're going to consider tonight for the first time. Just see it, right? This report that's being spoken about poses questions about the future development of the region. Such questions will involve FAMPO, that's all of you, making some choices. In some cases, alternatives to vast roadway capacity expansion, for example, adding lots of lanes to a road, could be considered as a suite of options operating in concert. So if you decide, I'm giving you a little foretaste of your discussion later, to say, if you decide that these are too many roadway expansions, too many lanes, it's too big for us to contemplate, there are other alternatives, but neither of them on their own is going to be enough to handle the capacity requirements that the congestion in the year 2050 is going to bring to the region, right? So if we want to not to do all of those, which you're going to hear about in a moment, there are other ways that you can deal with the future congestion. And here is a list of potential ones that you can look at. None of these on their own is going to fix the problem. You're going to have to take a whole bunch of them to achieve the same or a similar result to what all these roadway expansions are. Right. So it gives you options, and you are, after all, called the policy committee. So you want to make policy decisions. So these are policy options. Develop a network grid of roads to spread the traffic. So instead of, like one of the proposals in the report suggests, you need to put 8 lanes on Garrisonville Road, and that's too big to deal with. Well, you need to then develop a network grid of roads rather than put all the traffic on one central expressway. Reforming land use and zoning to allow high density nodes to be developed near existing transportation. And by that, I mean existing roads, existing rail, existing buses, other things that we have, right? You've got to put the roads where you're building the houses, or you've got to put the houses where you're building the roads. That's a policy choice. And of course, it's not a complete one or a complete other. These are halfway stations that you can work on. Operational improvements, like removing bottlenecks, this is not going to achieve enough capacity increase to cater for all the congestion, but it will help ease the path, right? Additional transit options, you've got to have a bunch of them to handle that number of people, the thousands of people that are going to need to travel in 2050. You can't just put on one bus. It's not going to fix the problem. You need a whole range of those. And increased travel demand strategies like van pools, carpools, slugging, biking, walking, telework. What I'm saying is, if it's too much of a shock to contemplate the massive roadway increases that you would need to deal with all of the congestion we're likely to get in 2050, here is a suite of options to think about. That's all I'm saying. Just something to think about. We've talked before about having a workshop on congestion, and maybe after you see the roadway report and discuss it, maybe early next year is the time to actually have this discussion to say, which of these choices do you as the policy committee want to make? Next slide. This is just a picture, right? But if you look at this, this is often what we've got. We've got a couple of main roads handling a lot of traffic, and then other roads that don't connect. And so we push more and more traffic onto these 2 roads. Whereas a grid, and that's what that first point means, if you make a network grid of roads, you don't put all the eggs in one basket. You don't put them all on one road and then suffer the consequences of having to put 8 lanes on that one road. So those are choices that you make. Our consultants will need guidance, and I'm jumping the gun a little bit here. So this will apply once you've seen the reports. Consultants need guidance on which projects to work on further to prepare them in terms of engineering, design, and drawings, the detailed cost estimates, so that you can pick those projects which you think you'd like to take forward in the next 10 years, 15 years, whatever. They need to do that work so that when the next rounds of funding applications come around, the projects you do like, you've put all the packages together, and the consultants will put those packages together so that we can apply for funding when that happens. To do that, you're going to get the roadway report today. We're hoping to put it out for public comment, get your comment, and make the amendments and changes that you think are necessary and that the public maybe thinks are necessary. After the presentation today, please give your comments. We're happy to hear them. Our consultants will be happy to hear them. I've got staff from the jurisdictions that are at the TAC have made a few comments that I'd like to relate to you about potential items that you could take further, which they believe will have some value in the jurisdictions. If you approve the revised version of the transit report, the bike and transit projects will also be advanced to some further planning stages. After some discussions with the TAC, these are two projects that people felt you might like to consider to take further forward. This cluster of 3 roadway projects called the Western Network, which you'll hear about later today, and Mills Drive. I think I might have misspelled that. If I have, I apologize, but Mills Drive in Spotsylvania. Next slide. So the cluster of roads, there's a map showing you. The idea is to take Centerport Parkway and Enon Road and build a connection all the way through to that courthouse road up there. And you'll see that those are missing gaps. If you do that, you will connect a pathway through Spotsylvania County as one example. Mine Road to Centerport Parkway connection would need to be built, Centerport Parkway to Enon Road, and then this realigning of that intersection of Truslow, Enon, etc.
Mr. Chair, I just want to
Yes.
make a comment, just for the record, it's Stafford, not Spotsylvania. I know you just made
I beg your
it
pardon.
county, but just in case anybody's following along, they're like,
beg
what
your
is
pardon.
happening?
You are absolutely right. It's in Stafford. I apologize. Mills Drive is in Spotsylvania. So that is the cluster of 3 improvements, which staff think would be a good idea. There is one alternative there. You could connect through to Plantation Drive instead of Enon. Those are alternatives. Next slide. Mills Drive. You'll see in the report later, there's a recommendation that this section of it, that's the train line currently and the station, that is going to be congested in 2050, and that needs to be upgraded. The staff of Spotsylvania jurisdiction feel that further section to the west of this would need to be upgraded in concert with that. So maybe not only that section. Next slide. So before I get to the river crossing, where we are in the process is last meeting, I explained to you the points at where the congestion is going to be the worst by the year 2050. You remember those slides, 13, 14 of them, based on what? The travel demand model. It says that based on the growth of the population, the jobs, etc. in the area, that is where the worst congestion is going to be on the east-west routes between now and the year 2050. Tonight in the report, you will hear what the proposed solutions are by the consultant, and you can take a view on what to do about those. The river crossing. So we were requested by 2 jurisdictions to investigate. They don't like the word investigate. To my language as a South African, the word investigate doesn't mean any crime was committed. It means do some research, right? So forgive my language. We're requested to do some research. So we're starting with some research. The TAC recommended a working group. We've set up a working group of all of the FAMPO jurisdictions. The working group has met to consider just the initial issues, what the questions and problems are. Multiple locations are being investigated as solutions. So the folks that have come to speak tonight, the option that you've seen in the report that's tabled, that's presented tonight, is an indicative holding position for the model to tell us how the congestion impacts would turn out. It's not where the road will eventually be built or a bridge will be built. We're looking at multiple options, including the one that you presented us with. So there's no decision on that. We're investigating multiple options. Staff are also meeting with interested parties. We've had some developers approach us. We've been talking to economic development folks from the localities, meeting obviously with TAC representatives. The working group we're hoping is going to meet again in January and February to look at what options would be viable and then produce a matrix for you all at the policy committee to consider of this would be possible, that would be possible, this would be possible. These ones are much more difficult, much more expensive, etc. And ultimately, we'll produce a report which we will share with FAMPO and with the localities. And then I made this point: a consultant will likely be required to complete pre-engineering and environmental analysis. FAMPO does not retain engineers on staff. Actually, we do have an engineer on staff, but not to do this kind of work. We don't retain engineers on staff, and so we would require a consultant to do that. Also, FAMPO currently doesn't have an environmental expert on staff, and we would need some of that work to be done if this project is to go forward. So I'm just flagging this as a future need, that we will probably need a consultant once we've done our high-level planning investigation. If the jurisdictions wish to go further with this project, we will need a consultant to do further engineering work. Next slide. I'm stealing the thunder of my 4 colleagues over there, but only this one slide, you can relax. So the river crossing, you've actually got it in your pack, so I'm not stealing it that much. But what will happen if we build a bridge? This was the point, ma'am, of that line on the map, which you're looking at. You will be able to reduce congestion regionally by about 10%, and in your extremely congested travel conditions, about 7% if you build another crossing, right? That doesn't say where you build it, it just says somewhere in the vicinity if you build it. On US 17, we will reduce the congestion by about 10%. Not this year, when it's built. So the congestion will continue to grow from now until the bridge eventually opens, if it gets built. And then you will drop the congestion on Warrington, US 17 by about 10%, Fall Hill Avenue by 12%. Route 3, this one's complicated. 1% is really within the margin of error. And the issue here is that it depends where on Route 3 you count. If you think you're going to build a connection into Central Park, the traffic will filter through to Route 3. The section from where the traffic hits Route 3 and the I-95 will probably not go up, may even go down, but the traffic from wherever it hits, let's say Bragg Road, Route 3, outwards may go up by 1%. Depends where you build it and where the connections are. On Boulevard, there may be an impact. But the consultants will be able to run you through those numbers. I'm just trying to put it in context for you if we go with this. The implementations, I'll let them, as the consultant, talk to this. This is really their slide I've just stolen to show you in this discussion about a bridge what might occur.
Are they here today? Are they gonna
Yes,
talk?
The 4 gentlemen over there are here. And
I just need to explain that magic traffic disappearance though.
They will explain it. They're the biggest team I've ever asked to come to FAMPO, standing right over there. They'll explain it to you in a moment. Next slide. So that's the end of that. The station next door, we believe the construction is going to start in December or January. There's a penalty if they don't start by January on the Fredericksburg station, so it's coming very soon. FAMPO welcomes a new GIS technician and planner, Mr. Connor Anderson. He's not well today, so he's not here. Otherwise, I would introduce you. But this is the first time in the last 6 months we now have a full complement of full-time professional staff at FAMPO. We've been understaffed for quite some time, and we now finally have the full-time staff that we need to run it. We could still take a part-time intern, but that's not necessary. We have our full complement for the first time. So we've been doing, some of us, double duty for a few months. With the Great Resignation, you'll remember some of our staff moved to other employment. All CTB meetings never occurred, right? They were.
Then they will not.
They had been removed and cancelled. So there are no fall CTB meetings. Staff attended the Governor's Transportation Conference. I went to the conference, and we were at least represented there, listened to what the governor had to say about transportation, and sounds very good. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you. Happy to take any questions. But the experts on the
Sure.
projects are over there.
Why did the CTV meetings not take place?
I can't answer that. We don't have any.
These were the ones that were open to the public.
Yes.
Correct. They just could, they didn't have the time to.
Okay,
We had the spring ones, we did not have the fall ones.
okay, thank you.
Chair, I know time is pressing, so I'm not going to say anything more unless there are questions from anybody.
Do we have any other questions, or Mr. Willis? All right, thank you very much. All right, moving on to our action and discussion items. Item 8A, the transit report public comment summary.
Mr. Chair, the only reason for this item is to just legally close the public comment period. Practically, it closed already ages ago, but we never actually officially banged the gavel and said it's closed. So please, when you bang the gavel and close.
I hereby declare the public comment period closed.
There we go, done. We've produced the report. It's in your pack, but we don't need to read the whole thing. You've seen it all already.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on to item 8B, the CMAQ STBG call for projects update. Mr. Rideout.
Good evening, everybody. I'll try to be quick. Congestion mitigation, air quality, and certain block grant program call for applications ended on Friday, November 18th. We received 27 total applications. Next one. So from what we know, at least initially at this point, we do have some projects that closed out, so we'll be able to offer slightly a little bit more money than what was initially kind of scheduled for fiscal year FY 28 and 29.
John, I'm just going to interrupt you. Something that we've now established is that some of that money from the closeout projects relates to the 5307 money switch. Do you remember? So we paid for one of the train stations or two of the train stations that DRPT is upgrading out of 5307 funding, which gave us back a big chunk of CMAQ. So that's why we're going to have extra money this time.
Yeah, right. And so we're looking at about a little over $2.5 million for CMAQ funding in FY 28, just over $2 million in STBG funding for 28, and then we will know our fiscal year 29 funding amounts in March of 2023. So we have about 6.6 in known funding for this call, and we have an estimate between 10 and $12 million coming up. So for the next slide. Of our 27 projects, jurisdictions typically do ask for a lot more potential money than we have available. The city of Fredericksburg submitted a near full complement of projects. I think we could have had one more STBG. Fredericksburg Go submitted 6 projects. They had projects that were eligible for both. And what we do for these projects is actually score them for both. And then we can move on to how they score to determine which pot of funds they would be best potentially suited for. Spotsylvania County submitted, I believe, 7 projects. A few of them are eligible for both, and Stafford County submitted 4, which both of those are available. Once we get into the funding, some jurisdictions are going to be required to kind of pick their pot on availability. Other projects like some of Spotsylvania's could actually be eligible for both funds and pull from both.
So question on that. Why was a river crossing study not considered for both if we talked about the congestion mitigation?
Because it's a planning study.
Because it's a
study, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
So CMAQ funds are more restrictive, STBG are a little bit more flexible.
Before you move on the slide, that 200,000 over there for that river crossing study, that's the bridge. That is a holding number, right? I don't have a cost estimate. I'm still working with VDOT to determine what they would require from us in terms of if you wanted to go ahead with this bridge and the crossing, what items would they need a consultant to produce for that to be considered for something like Smart Scale or one of the federal grants? And when I have those details nailed down, we will ask various consultants to give us an actual number. That's not an actual number. But because there was a deadline and because I know we're going to allocate funding, I put something in there as a placeholder. I will come back to you in January with more information once I have the information. I don't have it now. Just wanted to alert you in case you decide or the jurisdictions decide they want to go ahead with the project. I need to have something in place in case.
Sure.
Just
Yes.
Not limiting any of the jurisdictions to how many projects you can put out there, or is it just?
It is limited. It is.
It is.
Yes, you approved the policy last about March, I believe, February could have been, and that policy specifies very specifically that each jurisdiction is allowed 5 projects for CMAQ and 5 projects for STGB, and the transit agencies, if they apply, are allowed 3 applications. So that is how jurisdictions have applied, and that's why John said just a moment ago that the ones for FXBG Go, Freight Transit, will need to be reduced by half because they've applied in some cases for both CMAC and STGB, and it's got to be one or the other. So the total number will be reduced, but we're first going to score them, and once we've scored them, they will need to pick which category they want to put each project in. And so some of those projects will be removed because they won't be on both, they will only be on one. But everybody to date has followed the policy that is laid out.
So the city of Fredericksburg and the Fred bus aren't the same?
No. OmniRide, Freight Transit, and VRE are considered transit agencies.
But they don't have projects up there, right?
Fred does, but not VRE or OmniRide. However, remember VRE has got all of those projects which we've now funded to upgrade all the train stations. They did not this year submit a request for additional funding. It's all in the policy, though. You all went through that when we approved the policy.
So this was just a summary breakdown to let the policy and everybody know exactly which jurisdictions kind of applied for what funding kind of amounts. So just to provide an information on how all the jurisdictions kind of get projects.
And as John says, that amount at the bottom is estimated. We will only know when DOT gives us that final amount, which probably will happen in March, and we'll money. It's the biggest amount that we will allocate in one go for quite a while, so it's a large amount of money. However, you also see that the jurisdictions have applied for a large dollar amount number of projects, so we're not going to be able to fund all of the ask.
All right, any further questions? Yes, Ms. Bomke.
Okay, if I remember correctly, thank you. Some of these projects have already had a lot of money put on them, and there are outstanding balances based on overrides or increases in expenses. If I remember, wasn't there a chart in the packet on that? Can you put that up there, please?
In previous chart, the ongoing one, I do think we've had an update. I'm trying to, it's the ongoing allocation tables that are all
Correct.
past projects.
Correct.
I don't think I have it on an update.
Yes.
So I'm just, so for tonight, for this information was just to provide you what information for the new projects that were submitted. We do have outstanding projects, and within our methodology, there is the option, there is within the recommendations that were staff produced, how to apply fund future year fundings, what's going to be available to past projects that are under it. If it's under 10%, a jurisdiction can request that that cost increase be applied through future years or through our STBG or CMAC kind of 10% reserve. If it's a more than 10% increase, it comes back to the board. So it's not something that is automatically pushing funds, future year funds back automatically to all projects. It's basically they can be re-reviewed at that point in time.
So the policy tells us exactly what to do, which is that if the increase on an individual project has gone up over 10%, then we have to bring it to you for a decision as to what to do. If it's 10% or less, it tells us how to backfill those projects before we fund new projects. It's in the policy.
If a project jumped, 50%, $30 million, it's not something that they say, okay, we don't have any new projects because it's already on it. It actually comes back before this group for approval or to be rescoped or changed.
So when, okay, I'm sorry, it wasn't in the slide deck. I'm sorry. Our staff sent this to us.
Yes.
We have a 5-month process, in which case you will keep getting updates to the process of where we are with each of these things. And there are a bunch of projects which have had scope increases from all of our jurisdictions, and we are going to have to deal with those, and we will bring you a full list of those with how much it's gone up by. We've asked that information from the jurisdictions. And then if If the increases are over 10% each, we will come to you and ask you for direction as to what you would like us to do.
Okay,
That's in the policy.
yeah, we want to see that for sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Any further questions? All right, thank you very much. Moving on to 8C, the intra-regional multimodal east-west mobility study roadway report. Phase 2 road and bicycle pedestrian presentation. Mr. Daly and Mr. Morrison.
And the team. Will you introduce everybody? Thank you.
And have Thanksgiving. In addition to Drew Morrison, I also have Frank here, and we'll be hearing from Daryl in a little bit, our transit expert, travel demand modeler, and transportation planning and policy experts respectively. So I don't want to repeat a lot of the thunder that Ian already provided. So
I can't explain the numbers, so I hope you can.
we'll get into the crystal ball of numbers later. So don't worry, that's what these guys are here to discuss. So I just want to reiterate some of the points that Ian made, which is this is a high-level planning process. We are at the beginning of that process, meaning that this study is that first piece. So to Ian's point about these lines on maps, we want to be very clear that they are theoretical. They are for modeling purposes. Just a reminder that this is an offshoot of this phase 1 study that was completed by FAMPO staff earlier in the year. We picked it up with phase 2, where we were tasked with studying the 13 corridors that had been identified in phase 1, as well as looking at 5 pet bike potential projects, and narrowing those down through our modeling process and analyses to a handful of projects that we'd take further, as Ian described, into that next phase of the study, which would be that additional study of environmental or very specific operations analyses, as well as geometric considerations, alignment, things of that nature. So with that having been said, our goal here tonight is really to give you the high-level report on that high-level study, so that we can move forward into that public comment period. We really appreciate the comments that we're already hearing. We've been working very closely with city and county staffs, as well as the stakeholder group. And we really do appreciate the input we're receiving already. And we'd like to continue that process with the formal public process. So with that, we're going to jump right into Matt. We're going to jump into the findings of the roadway analysis.
Mr. Chair, as he's bringing that up, I just, one of the questions is, did you start with a clean piece of paper, or did you look at all of this stuff's been looked at 15 times throughout, years and years of analysis. Have you looked at all of the previous drafts and incorporated that and came up with these solutions?
So part of yes and no. So there were certain things that we were asked to study specifically. So phase 1, look at these 13 corridors. Yes, we are fully aware of previous study efforts. And Nat, I think, was going to touch on that in a minute. So we'll let Nat continue.
And stop us if we don't fully answer your question. So in phase 1 was really looking at where is the worst congestion in 2050 that may not be addressed through, in this case, it was starting with the 2045 LRTPs when this started out. Understanding where is, particularly focused on this sort of extreme and severe congestion. Where is it going to be really bad, even with all the slate of projects that you have programmed, focused on,
My last interruption, sorry. A question you asked last month when I was doing the congestion analysis slides. The road which you said we did not, Butler Road, we did not present as congested. The reason for that is that in the current FAMPO CLRP, there is already a project to widen Butler to another 2 lanes. So this study assumes that we are going to do that and doesn't say we need to do yet more, because those additional 2 lanes, according to the travel demand model, say that we don't need yet more lanes after those 2.
Yeah, because I noticed last night when I was reading materials that there were 13 roads up there. And then all of a sudden in the rest of the studies, Butler Road didn't exist. It just evaporated. There was no footnote or anything identifying where Butler Road went. Anyway, go ahead. Thank you.
Can I piggyback on that comment? Seriously, if you're looking at a holistic approach, and if Ian, you weren't here, how would someone know that Butler Road should be part of that whole report? And they took from phase one to phase two, what you proposed as the most busy roads, for example. And my question is, what data model did you use to come up with those 13 roads?
So we used the regional travel demand model, which is owned by VDOT, and we looked at the evening peak traffic and what that peak traffic would be like in the year 2050. And on that basis, the stakeholder group discussed which 13 corridors would need to be studied because they're going to be the 13 most congested corridors. So that's the way. The travel demand model, the evening peak traffic, and which of those are going to be the most congested in 2050. So the travel demand model was a large part of that. We also then discussed it with the stakeholder group, which represents staff of all of the jurisdictions, plus some community stakeholders like the university. And the only one that was changed is Enon Road was substituted for a smaller road, which the Stafford County staff believed was not as important. So we put Enon Road there in exchange for another road, which was less important. But that's how that list was chosen. And the consultant was asked to investigate those because they're all east-west roads. Remember, this is an east-west study.
Yeah, and in full transparency, I didn't finish reading the report. But just to do evening, I was wondering why we didn't do morning, because we live off of Garrisonville Road, and morning is heavier than evening, so I wasn't sure why, or was that
So Garrisonville Road,
of the,
yeah, Garrisonville Road is in there.
no, I'm saying, you said evening.
Yes.
Evening, but I'm
Yes.
saying that morning is even busier than evening, so I was wondering why they did only evening, so yeah.
I believe you. Butler Road is also there, but as the gentleman is about to take you through this will explain, it became apparent that with the project in the CLRP, we don't need additional work on Butler Road, but it is in the study, and you'll see the report on the congestion figures in the report for 2050 for Butler Road. It's there. Sorry, Tim.
And no, that's, so these were the 13 corridors that were identified in the phase one of the study. And then as part of that, our first effort was to take those very long corridors and really focus in where is the congestion and understand where is that congestion. And we focused on PM, but we looked at all day in understanding, as the model gives us morning and daily and AM as well. So really understanding where is the peak, sort of both directions. And not surprisingly, it really focuses around I-95. But these were the areas that we were trying to understand what was happening, and then what would be some solutions to try to address this congestion. And so, as a starting point, looking at all 13 corridors, identifying what's the average peak VOC ratio along that worst congested part. So VOC is volume to capacity. This is from the travel demand model, so this is not like verbatim exactly what's going to happen. This is at that macro scale. When you take 5 steps back, 50,000 feet, what does it look like in terms of roughly how many cars are you trying to push through? That's the volume. To what does the model estimate is the total capacity? Then you look at that over the course of several chunks over the course of the day, and then that generates what that overall peak is. And looking at both directions of the corridor, understanding that travel is not balanced necessarily, right? Sometimes some roads have more, morning you might be one way, PM it might be another. The daily might balance out, but it might not. So really trying to understand what's happening directionally. We've highlighted in general the ones that really sort of the worst of the worst, and understanding what is going on. And then, to the point about Butler Road, when we looked at it again more closely, determined that it's actually not going to be nearly as severely congested as sort of was originally thought. So that's why it talks about it in the report, but it doesn't otherwise, beyond saying there's not really any more additional improvements. It's not really. But for the rest of these, we did look at what those improvements might be. I think a couple of these things are also important to understand as you start to take a step back and try and understand where is the congestion and what's driving it. And obviously, you can't necessarily fully understand what's going on in any system, right? When we just stare out at 95, you don't necessarily know what's causing all the traffic. You can't necessarily understand the travel model, but there are some takeaways that we found when looking at what's happening in the region. Generally, where it's auto-oriented travel, congestion's higher, not surprisingly, but that's again where you tend to have those high volume arterials. But perhaps one of the other things that is maybe intuitive when you think about it, but not necessarily intuitive just at first blush, but that the east-west traffic and the north-south traffic are really very heavily linked. And that there's a lot of times, right, to go east-west, you have to travel north-south and vice versa. So there's a lot of just the way the roadways in the area are constructed, especially with just the 2 river crossings, as we'll talk about. There's a lot of times where you're making movements that might be sort of a C movement, where you may have to go east or west to get, for example, the 95 or US 1 in order to go to some of those. So you have a ladder or you're making a C or a reverse C. And that there's a lot of then overlapping traffic, and so that you can't necessarily solve one problem without paying attention to what's happening in the other direction. And that there's a lot of these already wide arterials, right? You have a lot of 6-lane arterials where there's going to continue to be congestion in the future. And so we talk a little bit in the report, and Drew will talk a little bit. But again, from the travel model perspective, what we're seeing is, yeah, there's congestion. And so there may need to be some level of improvement along those. But just because we're talking about, oh, there needs to be improvement, it doesn't necessarily mean a widening is the solution or the only solution. It's likely there's other operational, other policy, other things that are going on there that need to be investigated. And this is really sort of that first step to say, look, there is a lingering problem. We're going to need to figure out what's going to happen and what that might look like. And then we've talked a little bit about what some of these regional projects might look like, and just understanding that even with solving this, and this is what we've been talking about, even with the LRTP, there are lingering. So this is trying to address some of those lingering congestion. So I think I'm going to hand it over to Drew, who's going to talk through specifics of the projects and what those might look like.
Thanks, Nat. So before we dive into the projects, I think we've given a little bit of this, and it's a late night already, so we'll try to be efficient. But you'll see that we were looking at evaluating projects based on what they did for congestion, how they could be implemented, and also cost. The cost figures, the numbers you'll see are high level hard cost side. There'd be more on design, property, environmental, and we flag that with some text right now, but that would be a key item for further investigation. We'll talk about both regional benefits in terms of congestion. That's overall within the FAMPO region. How do certain projects benefit how people are experiencing congested conditions overall, as well as how certain projects benefit specific corridors. And you will see that there are some projects that are better at that regional impact, and then there are some projects that are localized to a corridor impact. And so we'll, I think, jump in because the next item is about themes. And there are really 3 bundles of priority projects within the 12 focus corridors that we identified. And that bundle is what we're calling the Western Network. The second bundle is a new river crossing combined with what a northern interchange might look like, as well as arterial widenings or conversions of existing turn lanes into through lanes. So 3 different types of projects that really emerged through our analysis. So that new Western Network, and Ian, you already spoke a little bit to this, we modeled looking at a Western Network here on the Stafford side that would look at widening of Truslow, connecting Enon and Centerport, and then connecting Centerport up to Courthouse. Here that was shown in the vicinity of Austin Ridge. In terms of the metrics we're looking at, we can see that regional congested benefit. So that's a 10% reduction in the overall congestion. Now, where does that reduction come from? That question that was asked earlier.
Before you answer that, you need to tell people if that is a big or a small change, because people won't necessarily know, is 10% typical or is it not typical?
Yeah, so 10% is a meaningful change. And if one of the ways to think about that volume of change is think about the difference between the school year and August. Right? That's the sorts of fluctuations when we see on the vicinity of 10 percent change in traffic, when we start to see some of that reduction in discretionary trips, we start to see some people out of town, something like 10% is a meaningful impact on overall congestion levels.
Quick question.
Sure
If
thing.
you're talking about what we're gonna see in 2050, in respect to 2050, that 10%, when are we reaching that 10%?
Right, so that is basically the way the analysis works is we go out to 2050, we project what we call our no build, which is actually building all of the projects in the LRTP, TP, but nothing that we're talking about tonight. So we get a certain level of congestion. That was the table that Nat showed that showed certain
Right.
roads still pretty well.
Right.
So that 10% is relative to that. So it's not relative to today, it's relative to that future congestion we might experience, because the point of this project is to see beyond everything on the books, what's still needed. So that's 10% versus the regional congestion we see in 2050, with everything that's been approved, but nothing here.
Gotcha.
Yes, Ms. Bonke.
So help me understand, for Truslow Road, I would hope that you knew that we just did a brand new Truslow Road expansion with the express lanes going underneath.
Mhm.
Why would we consider something like this? And does that cost of 115 to 140 million include Transurban expanding that bridge?
Yes, so the short answer is that basically, this is part of the 2050 idea here. We're looking at where's the congestion in the very long-term out years here, and what are the somewhat limited universe of choices we have to work with? Because in terms of getting that connection across, we have the challenges of widening other roadways and bridges. And we have the opportunity in terms of what this is able to connect to and what it does for the model to, yes, have to go back to that question, raise that issue again. But it has some, clear benefits for us in a long-term horizon. Now, one of the things that we heard from county staff and that informs sort of the overall recommendation is to de-emphasize that Truslow widening for that very reason and focus instead on the rest of the Western network, which generates much of the benefits in terms of providing that access that avoids some of that C movement that Nat was talking about. So,
Well, and the other big negative to Truslow Road, as you're coming east, it dumps out onto Route 1. Great. You can make a right-hand turn, but you can't make a left-hand turn there. There will never be a traffic light there. VDOT's already told us that because it's too close to the traffic light at Route 1 and 17. So I don't even think that should be considered.
so that's sort of the comments that we're looking for in terms of the feedback on the recommendations here.
But I don't even think you should have studied it.
Well, so I think one of the things when we were looking at the corridor, understand the comment. There are a couple of things that we were also looking at that this could tie into, including some of that connection filling in. For example, we assessed looking between Warrenton and Truslow to provide a little more, again, those teeth that in that grid that Ian was talking about earlier. But we hear the comment, and we're trying to inform where we focus in the advancement of it.
Staff
Thank
of
you.
Stafford County do like the rest of that project and have asked that bottom section be removed.
Correct. So in terms of, Ian, you showed a better graphic. We're showing the modeling assessment to it in part to reemphasize that this is really looking at links, not particular routes, but that the Western network that Stafford staff had suggested is extend Plantation Drive and then look and go out toward Mine Road.
When you say staff, which staff are you referring to?
So the staff on the TAC, the county transportation staff who work with FAMPO on identifying the project.
Alex.
Okay, sorry.
I've seen it.
It's Alex and Matthew and I believe
Maybe Brian County.
Brian and so on.
So that's the Western network. So we talked about it has that level of benefit in terms of that 10%. And then, the similar benefits with this recommended approach. So then the second big bundle is looking at the river crossing and potential interstate access, which we looked at as separate and well as connected. So I think we've targeted at this point a little bit. This was the modeling exercise, look at two close points to understand what the benefits would be. And we see benefits in terms of regional congestion, that reduction in 10%, 7%, And that sees some benefits in terms of providing a new connection across the river west of 95. We see some benefits in some of our more challenged corridors. A project like this has lots of cost, has lots of complexity, has already been discussed today.
So let's discuss it again.
Yeah.
So, I brought this up earlier, and the problem is that, this has been proposed. This was part of the original outer connector 20 years ago that was killed for environmental reasons and pick a number of reasons. And it's in particularly the location, I know the folks over here are talking about, this is kind of OBE at this point, particularly in that location. But from Spotsylvania's perspective, let's just say you went through and built this because it made sense. You aren't accounting for the traffic on the south side of the river, because where are you going to dump it all?
But
If you took 10%,
1%.
Right, so you took 10% of the traffic off of 17, right? So I'm assuming right now that 17 has a greater traffic, daily traffic count than Route 3. I don't know that. But if you take 10% of that traffic, whatever that volume is, and you're taking it across this road, this bridge, and dumping it into Central Park, roughly, and then you're pushing it out somewhere, and you're saying I've got a 1% increase on Route 3, I'm assuming going west on Route 3, but how do you account for that?
Yeah, so I think that's important to know that it's not volume, it's congestion. And so what it does is basically this model is a gravity model. You got attractors and generators. So it's pushing people around based on the links that exist.
Right.
And so when we see a connection like this perform well, what it's saying is it's opening people up to a set of choices that allows them, the way the model works is the traffic works like water. When it hits a path of least resistance, it moves. And so a connection like this is opening overall network wide, more overall travel into reduced.
I understand some of the concept.
Yeah.
As you dumped it into the other side of the county, that's a lot of 10% congestion, assuming during the worst part of the day, right? That should be the highest volume of hourly traffic, and you're taking 10% of that and you're dumping it over into a network that's not designed to handle that. So I question the question from the model, did you model the outflow of that traffic past that connection at Route?
Yeah, and I think a lot of probably what's happening is that because a lot of it's just off the map here, right? But you have Walmart and Target and everything is here, right? And so that it's a huge generation from not just, Fredericksburg, but from the region. So there's a lot of people who are headed there. And so they're already there. It's just that they're then, in order to leave today, they have to get down to Route 3 and then.
I think you're missing that because there's all that stuff is on one side of the river and all that stuff's on the other side of the river. They're already on both sides of the river.
No, I think what he's saying is that the traffic is not going to go across that bridge and all of it go down into Spotsylvania because a whole chunk are going to stop at Wegmans.
But I'm gonna say, why would you build the bridge then? That's my point. But again, so, and we're not, I know Dave wants to say, but we've been advocating for a Western bridge for 10 plus years, and the worst place to build the bridges are where we build them, the highest and longest part across the rivers. They had things called fords out in Western, about 5 miles west of there, where you can walk across the river. Why we're not building bridges out there, which you could span the river? So, all right, Dave.
Well, just to ping on what Tim just said, we talked about reducing bottlenecks. So the one thing you guys are going to do is put another bridge crossing right where there's already a big bottleneck of bridge crossings and increase Route 3 traffic in Spotsylvania County, even at 1%.
Sure.
So I mean, I can't, as a Spotsylvania, how do I support that? And it is like, I think this is option 1 of the first outer connector that was built like 25 years ago.
5.
Okay, option 5. Matt knows it well. And it does, I'm sorry, but I've been here before. It seems like, the city of Stafford asked you to do a river crossing, and this happens to be the one who came up with it. It was one of Ian's slides, right? So, and then the other question I have, did you take into account self-driving cars in your model?
So I think
airplanes?
Yeah, no, I think there's two good points there. I think that one of the questions and why sort of a focus study on this point, that there are different things you try to achieve with a connection here versus an outer connection. And one of the things that the model seems to indicate that is that we've got traffic that is trying to do that C local, right? And a connection here is about trying to undo some of those choke points about that local traffic within the region. In terms of trying to bypass more broadly, that's what an outer connector does. And so this is really about how do we link the activity within and then pushing at the outside space. The model does very strongly push outside the region, what we experience every day.
How do we connect into those options? And the truth is that, generally speaking, if we can give ourselves drivers a variety of options.
Well, yeah, I understand that. I think we all understand that. And we all understand that when 126 is blocked down there, that I-95 traffic is bad. And if I-95 breaks down, the gentleman made a statement, and I don't know if your numbers took into account, but VDOT is, we're right now, we've just built some bridge crossings that we're still in progress. So your model couldn't possibly, I mean, the more actual data you have, the better your estimate, right? Has the model been verified by, like, has it been validated? Like it predicted this and this actually happened?
Yeah, so I don't know.
I'm asking a whole bunch of questions.
No, it's good.
But I think it would be good to let things settle down and then do the study. I thought your point was very, very well put back there.
So, I mean, I think to that point, the way the travel models work is it takes your regionally approved land use. So it's the land use that you guys have approved for the region, and what is the travel network? So it includes all the.
It does, but it doesn't, so right, but an actual road and getting data up an actual road is better than any model, correct?
I mean, for the purpose.
I mean, we modeled I-95 bridge crossing.
Mr. Ross, let them answer the question, please.
Want to finish the presentation, then maybe we can do the discussion after.
Yeah. Well, let's answer this last question.
That's convenient.
No, let's answer his last question.
So no more questions.
No, they were about to answer your question.
Go ahead.
I mean, the way the travel models work, right, is you're looking at it from 50,000 feet. And so that this is the officially approved VDOT model that looks to calibrate it against existing conditions. And so they're regularly updated. There'll be a new version in a few years when there are no traffic counts. But the idea is that it's based on travel behaviors that we as individuals make in the aggregate, not as individuals, but in the aggregate, and that those are patterns that last. And so that you can then look at what's happening in the individual facilities, which are then reflected in this model. So all of the improvements that have been made to I-95 are all coded in there as part of the background.
So
And so it's already take into account all that extra capacity.
Yeah,
that's
that
there.
didn't answer my question. Sorry, I am trying to be patient. My question was, isn't a model better predictive if it actually has, for instance, if we let the I-95 northbound crossing get finished and we actually can collect actual data off that, wouldn't that be a better input to your model than forecasting what that is going to be?
Right, and I think the answer is it might or it might not, because the way that travel models are built, they don't necessarily rely on individual facilities, right? The way the travel models function, they rely on behavior. And so it may or may not rely. Now, obviously, every region, there's a unique combination of land use and roadways and other features and barriers that may drive things and may make the model calibrated differently. So yes, widening the river crossing may change the calibration the next time they do it. It may also not change it. And so that's what I think is important to understand, is that just because you add lanes, it doesn't mean that the fundamental travel behavior has changed.
Correct. But I guess what I'm still asking is, it could change it, it could not, but wouldn't it most likely be more accurate using the new actual data?
No, I couldn't.
No.
I couldn't say that would be the case.
Well, I guess all the modeling and simulation I've ever done before is not correct then, because actual data, in my opinion, has always been better than model data to use in a model.
Yeah, no, I think it's, no, you're not wrong. I think what we're saying is, right, this is the data when the model was the best data at the time. So it was based
Sure.
on.
Oh, I agree completely. And all I'm asking you is, if you actually use actual data from the multi-billion-dollar projects that we're working on, they're complete, wouldn't it be more accurate? And you're saying, no, it was not. That's your answer, from what I
You
understand.
can't know one way or another whether it's going to be.
Mr. Yakubowski.
I have a question on this model specifically. And I totally agree that what we need are more ways for people to get around. I'm sick of 95. I've said that for years. I'm tired of pouring money into it. So why are we connecting to it and giving another access to it? Why not use this, for lack of a better term, as a local road, a local connection, and use the connections that we have for 95? Plus, getting a connection to 95 is not very easy. I'm not sure that that's even going to be possible.
No, that's a very good point. And actually what we study is, and we show it's shown here, but this result here is just the crossing in the absence of this.
Okay.
So this is just looking
To that part.
right.
Yeah.
And basically we have.
Very misleading. We
Yeah.
have to.
No,
Okay.
I hear that.
think anyone else
Let's explain this.
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna get to that, Chris.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they've got it right up there on the
No,
next.
it's a very good point. Basically splitting that conversation, you have that local effect, and that crossing itself is that 10% benefit. When you look at that interchange itself, I think to the point of just sort of funneling into that existing or planned traffic network. So this is milepost 131 up near the Welcome Center. You can see pretty minimal compared to, less than half the benefit because you're sort of just entering into that same constrained network.
Not worth the cost.
When you bring them together, we see some of that push why the overall regional goes down is you have some of that push into that network, I think, to the conversation we're having. But you're able to open up some bottlenecks, some of the worst bottlenecks larger in the system. So you see the extremely congested area, which is the worst of the worst, get better. So that poses that policy question of what do you might want the connection to do? Reopening a long conversation, I know. And then it would have different outcomes in terms of potential traffic flow in the region.
I would just say from Sponsy's point, or my point of view, is that I don't mind a connection between Stafford and Fredericksburg, but if the ramifications are going to be hardest hit on Sponsy, then why should we do it? So if you get rid of that little connection there and make it a true local road, then the benefits are there for all of us, as opposed to, like a gentleman said back here, just makes a new way for people to get to 95, or they'll head down to Route 3 when they could have just gone straight over to 95 from 17.
Right, and something that would need to be further evaluated, but could be the outcome of that hypothesis is, right, because you're taking away that clear, I've got this coming here, so that truck is gonna barrel its way that way. If this is really just taking you into the central area, and if you were trying to bypass to get to 95, you're into that same old Route 3 problem. Maybe this alone is a better way to deal with that localized connection.
I'm not supposed to say much, but Mr. Jakubowski's question, statement now at the end is a very good one, right? If it's if it's a local road, it achieves a lot. If you connect it to the I-95, it doesn't seem to be so good.
And especially for the cost, Ms. Gary.
Yeah, thank you. You were pointing that out and saying that it would address the worst of the worst. Are we talking about 95? Is that why that's there? I want to know. I don't think any of us envisions that happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the worst of the worst, what that means is, so within the model, we've got areas that are congested at one level, then that a smaller group.
Yeah, are you factoring in the 95 area right there into that when you say that? Because we know 95 is always congested and it's obviously within the region.
Yes. Yeah, so 95's operations are in the model. Yeah, and what happens there is in the model.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
So, so basically, when we take together that Western network, and when we look at this river crossing interchange combo, the overall network of those two bundles of projects benefits in the model are this about 20% reduction in congested conditions. And so that sort of when brought together, the ability region-wide to see some reductions, that's, relatively substantial. And we see some benefits on some of these core corridors as well. Now, alongside that bundle, we also looked at arterial widenings or lane conversions being where we have turn lanes. And so we take advantage of those where we can to maybe not widen the roads right of way more if we can get more through capacity. And so we looked through a variety, and some of the comments that we heard, particularly from Stafford County staff, were concerns about right-of-way impacts in the areas where we're not able to look at through lanes. And what we basically see with these sort of corridor roads, which goes to what was speaking about earlier about some of the limits of widening our arterials, we can get some good benefits and traffic reduction on the corridor itself, but pretty minimal regional benefits. We're able to get that corridor moving, and then it hits something else. So looking at widening Garrisonville within this area here, to try to use turn lanes where available up to 8 lanes, which is pretty wide, but we are able to reduce congestion by about 15% on that corridor. You can see the change in congestion overall pretty minimal because that traffic hits something else. Similarly, Courthouse Road on the Stafford County side, so
we see in looking at widening from Weymouth Church to I-95, 6 lanes, we do see some benefits to courthouse, some benefits in regional travel, about 5% reduction. And so that's another corridor potential project. Warrington, we look at approaching 95, converting right turn lanes to through lanes. This has some more minimal right-of-way impacts. And, you know, it actually has some regional benefits approaching. The model generated some modest overall corridor benefits, I think in part because it really helped people on this corridor get toward 95. So help the network overall, Warrington remain challenged. And then as Ian was speaking to, one thing that Spotsylvania staff have engaged with us a fair bit. So this is Mills Drive, US 17 in the vicinity of the VRE station. The congestion is worse as we approach Massaponax Church. And so this area with the widening, you can achieve substantial benefit. Staff have suggested looking to combine that with widening to the west side. And so that is something that could be considered as an advancement from the study. So those were sort of the projects that seem to have on the corridor widening basis, the largest corridor benefit itself. Some other projects that we were looking at on that overall list of corridors. Mountain View Road approaching Shelton Shop was showing some congestion. A simple widening approaching Shelton Shop basically improves the congestion sufficiently to address any severe extreme congestion problems on the corridor. But that's a relatively minor road compared to the others we're looking at. That's why it's in the secondary tier. We also looked at Cowan Boulevard in Central Park, and that was not too congested. In a couple of little segments, it was hitting up to the congested level. So in focused areas between Carl D. Silver and Route 1, you could look at widening to 6 lanes. That would have a lot of congestion benefits, but it's not that congested in the model. So when something's not that congested, adding capacity opens it right up. So that's something that's less emphasized because it's not a priority in the model. And then the other interchange we were studying as part of the process was Harrison Road. And that's been something that's been in the comprehensive plan. So this assumes the widening of Harrison approaching. It shows some meaningful benefits in terms of congested travel. It does it less efficiently. It creates more overall vehicles mile traveled than the other interchange we were looking at. And it doesn't have a larger benefit because it's got that same network to deal with. But it does, if we're looking at an interchange, there are benefits to why to advance an interchange to the south as well, including some benefits to Route 3, which is a pretty challenged corridor.
Okay, Ms. Bonke.
Yes.
So before we get to the pedestrian bicycle,
Perfect.
this is really frustrating. Okay, not me, but I know because I talked to staff today, our staff would like to know and see, and I know they have communicated this to your organization. They want to see the data that you put in and the assumptions that you made.
Sure.
I'm having a hard time really agreeing with some of your numbers. I'm just questioning the input to get these results. And we can't widen Garrisonville Road. We would take half of our businesses. So, you know, and you guys live up there. Is there a lot more build out?
Yeah, you're supposed to go to 8. That's gonna happen regardless.
So
For all the way out
There's
to
not
Rock Hill?
enough. She's just talking about the room.
No, there's not enough.
So we have pulled, Becky here at our office has pulled the GIS maps from your county. And VDOT, when they set up Garrisonville Road, has got a significant amount of right of way
For 8.
across that section of Garrisonville Road. It's not as bad as the staff initially said, right? There may be some impacts, like parking may have to go in some spots, but it's not going to destroy 100 businesses. It's not like that. Actually, look,
Because we've, what I heard, you're eliminating some of the turn lanes to accomplish this 8 lanes. And so one of Dave's projects in Route 3 was, as opposed to building new lanes or taking businesses, just taking the turn lanes away, taking the bump outs to give us additional capacity. And I thought that's what you said up there, even though if you're trying to actually take business, it's all commercial on Garrison, because I can take that to work.
So when you add extra lanes, you make the extra lane a turning lane. And so you still have 3 going straight.
Maybe. I don't know what their plan is.
That's what
but,
you meant.
Yeah, and we can certainly provide more clarity on the extent.
So-
I guess the first place is to.
My one question I just want to bring up, because you brought this up, Harrison, this gets back into something we have studied a lot. And the last study, this was considered the most beneficial work we could do for the region was to improve Harrison Crossing. For that, put an intersection there, but because of federal highway and all that, that was a problem. But now your study shows something different. This goes back to the question of what data are you using or your assumptions that came up with this model? Because when you start looking at the costs, again, I think VDOT will tell us, when you start to say, your rough estimate for the work is 100 million, but property design and environmental is probably double that, right? It's probably another 100 million to actually buy the property, do the design and environmental. So, I mean, when you start looking at these numbers, I mean, you presented $1 billion worth of work so far, plus.
Mr. Kelly?
Just a quick question, few quick questions. One, I think Ian at the very beginning had said we're basically using the VDOT modeling for most of these programs. Okay, so we're using VDOT modeling. What are the other options for modeling right now that we could use that would be acceptable to VDOT or when moving forward with projects before the smart scale and state?
So that would be a question, I think, for VDOT as to what would be
What
acceptable.
other options do we have?
Oh, you'll need to ask the people who know better than I do. Michelle.
Hey, pushing the buck down.
Hot potato.
You're looking at planning studies, use travel demand model. But then get to design level, like construction projects, we use more specific travel forecasts. And we use actual traffic count forecasts 20 years into the future.
But for a study of this level,
Study level, you use the travel.
demand model. So there's no, this is what VDOT uses.
This is what
Yes.
All right, that's all, that's,
high level traffic study.
it's just, we keep asking for, we want different numbers, we want to change numbers, we want to do it. We can't. This is what frankly, this is what you're going to have to use. These are the numbers I can play with until you get to the level of developing. So continually going through this and challenging the outcomes of the studies, unless you're going to present us with a new modeling program to use, which VDOT, by the way, and the state will accept as we put our projects forward, well, I'm ready to hear it.
If you're not gonna get it from
You're right.
this study, you're not gonna get a
Traffic light intersection.
project either, so.
Yeah.
you Get what you wanna do, but then. you're
So let me-
Study it further and then.
All right, so, because that's a good point, and that's what I want to kind of find out why we're here today. So we did a rough estimate of projects across here, and I know there's some potential to go to another level. And I'm assuming these guys want to get that work, that will do a finer level of detail to come up with, a smart scale level project. Why would that be not done by the jurisdictions? We submit the smart scale projects, this would be something that we would.
Okay, so a couple of comments from my side, and I'm happy to have others talk. But the aim of this study is to look a bit further into the future so that we're not worried about this traffic light and that particular turn lane 100 feet. We're looking at what does the future look like between now and 2050? First of all, at the macro level, because before you start fiddling with a traffic light, you have to take the total amount of traffic you're going to have and work out where it's going to generally go to know if the road network in total is going to work. That's what they've just done. Now, the next phase of this project says, let's look through these road projects and pick ones now that we can see the overall picture of what these projects do. We can now say, well, those 5, we don't think that's a good idea, or we think it's too expensive, but these 5 over here, we want them to work further on, which is part of this project to produce projects that you can then, as a jurisdiction or whatever, take further.
What was the cost of this effort?
There is a total project which includes the transit study, bike and ped study, and this roadway study with these 13 corridors and all of this, plus the engineering work which is going to be done now in the next 3 months based on the choices that are made. It's about 300.
Okay, so I guess my only concern is that I think you're looking for us to pick 5 projects today.
No, not necessarily.
Because I was going to say, I've heard enough, there's a lot of questions. I got questions from our staff. It sounds like Meg's got questions from staff and staff.
The next step is public comment.
Yes.
Well, I think with board comment, right? I think we've got to take this presentation, go back and let some of these questions need to be asked. Like, how did you what were the assumptions that you used? And see, do we consider these valid assumptions? Or we think you should tweak those assumptions and go back and give us another run at this thing? Because right now, I wouldn't even know where to start.
I have a question.
Oh, well, hold on, Ms. Hayes was first.
So going to the Mills Drive one, and that was a pretty significant reduction, I believe. But what was the assumption on that? Because it seemed to center around the VRE.
Yeah.
And are you assuming that the VRE is going to increase ridership? And that's what's impacting that? Because I mean, and I travel that road often, and they're really, and I know we're not looking at it today, but that's one of our least problematic roads at this juncture. And there's not a lot of entry points off of that that area. So I would assume that it, you know, barring any major developments, it would be pretty good in the future.
Yeah, so no, and it's really not any increase in VRE that drives it.
Okay.
But the model shows, so there's just off page, right? There's a development plan close to 95, and that's just something we talked about with county staff. The model basically has the connection with Massaponax Church and sort of this area flowing travel to the west and to the south as some of the major driver of congestion. Part of the reason why the widening performs well is it's on the overall lower end of some of the corridors that we're talking about. So when you see a big bump like that, that's a place where we were sort of more approaching the highest levels of congestion, not already over the top. So that's what we see in terms of the travel demand is in this vicinity to the west, and then also some of it breaking off to head southwesterly as well.
So what, just to go back to what Tim was saying, tonight you're just looking for some input on what projects.
We're looking for three things, if you are able to give that to us. First of all, we would like to put it out for public comment, like we did with the transit report. We take 3 months over this, right? This is not we want it all in one night. So we want to get public comment. Some of the public are here and have given comments. You all are giving comments. The jurisdiction staff have already had like 3 runs at this to give their own staff level inputs. Questions they've given have been answered in writing already. So this is for you to give us input and for us to ask for the public to give us input. The second thing is we are then looking at a couple of projects which they will study further. You heard Michelle say from VDOT a moment ago that there's another level to get to a funding application level. So if there are some projects that you think are worth taking to further study, it's already costed in the study. We don't have to go and look for extra money to take a couple of projects. And I showed you a slide at the very beginning, which is what we got as suggestions from staff. You don't have to agree with them. I just gave them to you for your staff gave their suggestions.
My last question. So based on this, because it applies here. So you've got these, this is a 2050 model saying that the traffic, because when you start talking about funding and smart scale, when do these projects need to initiate, right? So if it's a 2050 build, are we budgeting 2024, 2034, 44? So what is, you know, because that's why it's about money, right? It's not about the project, it's about how it's going to be funded. So the question is, based on your model, when are we talking about looking for a smart scale ready planning package to go forward? Because building one today does me no good for a project I'm building in 2040.
So today, yes, today we have a set of projects that are in with smart scale and are being scored, and we'll hear in January, February about whether we got the money and blah, blah, blah. So then there's a 2-year cycle before we get to this point again. So we would like to, with this consultant, select some projects out of here to prepare for any one of the next 5 cycles, right? Remember, I said at the very beginning of this project, the aim of the project is to give you a suite of options where we've tested what it will do in 2050. And 1 or 2 cases we found there's nothing we should do. And 1 or 2 cases we found a massive project will be required. And this study here cannot give you the drawings and all that because those 3 big projects can't be done in this study. We can't do the 295 interchanges in this study. It would require a separate engineering and design thing, which would have to be done separately. Similarly with the bridge, However, we have got a separate process to deal with the bridge if we want to go forward with it. So this is aiming at producing not those 3 mega projects, but other projects which you've seen tonight, which you think some of those are worth pursuing, which they can then take to the next level of analysis and start to work on projects that would be fundable. Not now. That project, that ship has sailed. We're waiting for the results of that one. But 2 years from now, we're going to be in another one, right? So we need to prepare future projects.
All right, so Ms. Young and then Ms. Gary.
Dr. Young.
Oh, excuse me.
Yes, thank you. So I understand our board members are here representing our board, but if I wasn't here, I would know any of this information, and I would like the rest of my board to know this information before it goes out to the public, because the public is going to ask us questions, and we need to unpack all of this before it goes to the public. And so I am not comfortable yet that I understand everything that is in here. But one of my questions that I had was, it was in reference to this negative 44%, and I've seen that you had several projects. So there's several projects here, and depending on which project we want to undertake, that's where the traffic will be alleviated or congestion will be alleviated. The question is, what larger of the, what's the area mass that you all took into consideration to say it is going to reduce the congestion, one, and then two, I've heard it many times, it's going somewhere, right? It's going to end up somewhere. So we do not look at it holistically of an area, Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, Stafford. Traffic is coming from Prince William. We are just not doing ourselves justice, and we're not doing due diligence to get the problem resolved. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Making perfect sense. That's what the travel demand model does. Not perfectly. It's a model. It's not the real world, right? Every model is not the real world. But that's what VDOT spends money on, creating this travel demand model.
So what,
Because it
if you
attempts.
do one and not the other, you're only creating, less congestion one area, and then say, for example, Garrison, still gonna bring that traffic onto whatever road, Enon, I'm just using these numbers, and then what? So we have to think holistically, which ones are gonna make the best and most bang for our buck, et cetera, et cetera.
That's the entire purpose of why we're here, at 100%. All right, Ms. Gary.
I think we should all take a deep breath for my time. I just want to make sure that we have the numbers, the adjusted numbers for if we take out that route to 95 from the potential river crossing. What does that do to the other numbers? Since I don't think anyone was anticipating that. And then if we can also come back with the other option that was for tonight numbers for that, I think we would all want to look at that information.
So your first one, we have it. It's on the slides in front of you. If you scroll up, the numbers for the bridge on its.
Without the 90.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what that rectangle means.
It's
And
there.
that's my fault on the graphic, so yeah.
So there, that's only the bridge.
Right, but we can make that clear.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
That is
A lot
the
of
number.
information.
Yeah, so
So everything you have printed to the left there on that model
just the
is
crossing.
just the crossing.
As a modeling
Got it.
exercise, not necessarily that it's there, but that there's a link between the flows that are there.
Well, that's pretty good. I mean, those are pretty good percentage changes. If that doesn't include 90, because that's why I was asking you.
Correct.
Does it include 95 when you were talking about the impact? So I was confused because maybe you didn't understand my question when you answered it, but that makes sense now.
Okay,
Thank
sorry.
you very much. That's okay.
All right, thank you. All right, please continue.
Yeah, so we will hammer quickly through some of the pedestrian and bicycle projects here. Just go back 2 seconds. Yeah. When we talk about back to one of the ones that has the region change, a larger regional change. Yeah, just so to your question, this is for the entire modeled area. So when we report these changes, this is the change not in the corridor. This is for it's trying to take a step back and look at what's happening in the entire region. This one project has impact on the region, and then this is the impact on that specific corridor.
And so say if you take three projects together, did you all, without knowing which ones the board will decide on, have you don't just add up the numbers. Have you all taken that into consideration and get those numbers? Say if I take project 1 and 2, I didn't see that presentation.
Sure. We did model in the report a couple of the combinations. That's how we got, for example, to the Western Network, that a few of those roads on themselves didn't do so much. But when brought together and really filling in that flow on the west side, you started to see some larger.
But not all projects have been taken, like if you do
Right.
all the
there's like
projects, you have not done that.
combinations or something. Yeah, there's a large number of combinations. So no, we have not. We combined a couple.
But not all.
And right. And so some of the, and to
I mean, yeah, we just.
some of the widenings that are arterial projects that are largely standalone, those are largely going to be additive because their impact is largely very localized.
Gotcha.
The regional projects and the combination, obviously, as you can't just stack because it adds. And in some cases, though, it's the opposite. Like the Western Network, if you look at the individual projects, each one, like extending a portion of Centerport by itself really doesn't do a lot. But if you start to add the projects together, it adds a whole lot in terms of the
The reason why that Western Network works is because it provides you an alternative to get north and south through Stafford County without using the I-95, west of the I-95, right? Because there's no US 1 west of the I-95. There's nothing. And so Centerport Parkway doesn't connect through to Courthouse Road. Centerport Parkway doesn't connect south to Enon Road or to Plantation Drive. So there's currently a very difficult route to try and get north-south in Stafford County without using the I-95 or US 1. And that's why I think the staff at Stafford County like that particular set of options, because it starts to provide you that route to get north-south through Stafford County without using the I-95.
Mr. Kelly. Question, Ian, you mentioned that our respective staffs have had 3 chances to go through this with a TAC. What are the outstanding?
Not only the TAC, the stakeholder
group and TAC, but our respective staffs, let me put it that way.
Yes.
Okay, what outstanding questions, concerns are still being directed by staff to where we're at now? Are there any additional questions or concerns outstanding?
So all the questions that we've got in writing were answered in writing, and I sent those to Stafford County and to Spotsylvania County, and I forget whether the city sent a bunch in writing. The city staff came to the last meeting of the stakeholder group and really raised this question of what is FAMPO's policy when dealing with congestion? Because when we look at these projects, the total cost of them is huge and the impact is huge, but do we have to do all of them? And do we have to do all of them now? And so that raised that policy question, which all of you as the policy committee ultimately need to make a decision on. What is our policy? And that's why Dr. Schneider raised that question like 2 or 3 months ago to say, shouldn't we discuss what our reaction is to congestion? Because this is what happens if we look at the model into the future. We paid a consultant to look into the crystal ball and tell us what the future looks like as best as they can, and they did. And they've told us that we're going to have congestion on these corridors and we need to do the following things as examples to fix the problem. So your staff the city staff raised those questions. Is this not too big for us to deal with? And what are the other alternatives to the congestion problem? Because the model says it's coming. I mean, we can pretend it's not. The model says it's coming.
So when are you expecting responses from the Stafford Spotsylvania staff on their, you've addressed their.
So they have.
How long?
Writing. No, they've sent them in writing. We have sent written detailed comments.
But I would say, also that Stafford County staff did also express, to this conversation, a preference for the Western Network relative to the widenings for the same sets of issues that the super. So that network filling in the teeth versus some of the impacts of potential widening.
So Matthew has sent an additional question. He wants to get the behind the scenes data. We can make that, I'm sure, available, but there's no question about a particular project or about a particular roadway that is outstanding.
What about VDOT? Does VDOT have additional questions?
VDOT sent us a list of questions.
Uh-huh.
Some of those have already been incorporated into this report, the answers. In other words, some of these projects have been changed based on VDOT's feedback. The balance of them, VHB prepared written responses, and I've sent those over to Stephen. So VDOT has those responses.
Have they had a chance to absorb those and discuss internally and come back?
I don't. Stephen?
We've actually had some conversation today and.
Can I just make a
Today.
recommendation? Otherwise, we're gonna be here till 2:00 in the morning.
Exactly.
This is not Prince William County. So I'm not staying up that late. I think that we need to just let you go through your presentation. And then I think if there's no time restriction on this, maybe giving our staff another month to look at this. Supervisors can ask their questions that they might need, and then bringing it up for action at the next meeting.
So, what I'll say is let's finish the presentation. I think to heed that advice. Then we do have an item on here, a resolution about bringing it up for public comment, and I think we'll have that.
We can discuss that then. but I-
Exactly. I think now, yeah, we'll complete the presentation.
There are two more projects, honestly, bike and ped projects, and then I think you're done, yes?
Yes, sir. So, let me follow through quickly. Bike and ped projects, Fall Hill Town Center Study Area. This is something that was looked at in the plan, the sector plan for this area. We're looking at providing a shared use path along Carl B. Silver Parkway, first on the west side, then at Cowan connecting over to the east side. That looks at using some of the parking in the area that's already been identified in the small area plan as identified for pedestrian and bicycle improvements. There's an alternative as this parcel redevelops that may be in this area that has some more of the parking impacts to look at providing the connection there. But this provides good connectivity to some of the east-west pedestrian and bicycle routes. And then the other thing we looked at is really coming out from the east of the city, starting with Chatham Bridge. We have the opportunity from the new bridge to provide a connection to the existing trail. And as we come out on Kings Highway, we can make use of the shoulder here. And then we were really tasked with looking at what would be high quality infrastructure to make use of some of the excess roadway capacity we have in the area. And so we did look on Chatham Heights, whether this road would be a candidate for a potential roadway reconfiguration. So looking at providing protected bicycle infrastructure in the road itself versus having impacts on the properties on either side. It does meet the criteria for a roadway reconfiguration. That would certainly be a larger regional conversation about how to use that road space. But if you're trying to provide a high quality bicycle and pedestrian route out of the city to the east, we look at the opportunity with one lane in each direction and a center turn lane with protected bicycle infrastructure and shared use path on either side to try to provide that access out to the east, connecting to East Coast Greenway and other activities in that direction. So those are the two projects we looked at. And then, we got feedback from Spotsylvania County as they're looking at a variety of multimodal improvements. And one of the corridors that we're looking at, Courthouse Road 208, there's a need to provide pedestrian accommodation across in the vicinity of 4 Mile Fork Center. So we've incorporated that ongoing planning of providing some crossings at this location to tie into the sort of larger roadway pedestrian improvements in this section as well.
That's a request from the county, which we've included in the study.
All right. Yes, Ms. Bond.
Put in a smart scan.
Okay, just to let you know, on behalf of a supervisor who isn't on this committee and doesn't attend these meetings, our colleague Tom Cohen is responsible for the area coming off of the Chatham Bridge. And he is working with a developer that has proffered some land in front of his project to continue the roadway project. Staff can give you information on that, but we would prefer that the bike ped trail not parallel Kings Highway if at all possible.
Okay, we can coordinate with staff on that.
All right. Next steps?
Well, I would say that I think your discussion is on.
Yes. All right, great. All right, so for item 8C2, Mr. Ellis, please correct me if I'm mistaken here, but the resolution here for directing a public comment period would be for, is it 90 days?
No, we usually do it for 30 days.
For 30, okay.
But remember, the public are here in the room behind you, and they're online listening to the presentation. So it's not as if the public doesn't already know what we're talking about. It's just a question of formalizing a proper public participation process.
I don't know.
We have to formalize it at some point.
So, Mr. Chair, to close out here, my last question on your study and methodology and all that is that you laid out like 13 crossings or something now.
Corridors.
But the 13 corridors, and in your 2050 model, did you model all 13 projects being built simultaneously or being completed?
No, they've done.
So did you do?
Yes and no.
So ultimately, I'm looking at is that there's some projects out there that the river crossing at probably $600 to $800 million, right? But all right, maybe there's $1 billion lottery ticket sold the other day. But what I'm saying is that there are multiple. Have you looked at multiple projects? You down selected the 5 that potentially were showed the most congestion mitigation, but the other 8 built for the same price as one may have actually generated more mitigation. Did you look at bundling the projects and came up with?
Yeah, so we did look at bundles in 2 general ways. One was in that sort of western network, and then looking at that combination of providing river crossing, toggle on or off, and interchange associated with it. And we looked at the bundle of the western network, which is a variety of little projects brought together, and that crossing interchange as a holistic one. And we looked at the individual major arterial widenings individually, because what we saw when we first ran them was their regional impact was rather modest and quite focused on the corridor itself. So we did look at those combinations, and
if anybody, I'm just going to go ahead and ask staff, if anyone else on the policy committee has a particular combination of projects that they would like to see the potential impact for, if it was not modeled in here, Charles, would you please accept those requests?
Sure.
And so we can get that combination of projects. Would you gentlemen be open to that? If we gave you a certain combination, you could give us your forecast. Thank you.
I only ask one thing, that you give me a deadline by which we receive them, because of course the consultants task order isn't this endless stream of we can go on for 6 months. We paid them to do a very specific task. These are kind of in the task order, but not really. So if we can get a finite list by a certain date, then I'm sure we can do that, but I don't want this to go on for another 3 months.
No, I was going to suggest within the next 2 weeks that, therefore it could be
fine.
within the proposed public comment period as well. So yes, Ms. Gary.
Yes, just one question on that, because Ian had said that we would also look at Green Bank. Is that something that can be included to look at within this as well? Or is that this?
So that's not this project. The research we've been asked to do in terms of building a bridge and a river crossing, that particular project, I would like to separate from this because it's a very large project.
Got it, okay.
And what we're doing.
We'll come back to that later and look at all that.
That is a FAMPO staff level, high level planning analysis at this stage, and we're looking at multiple options. We will bring you back data and information on that, and you can then decide, or the jurisdiction can decide, should we go ahead and get a consultant to do design work. But you need some information first before you make that decision, and we're trying to get you that information.
Sure, gotcha. Just wanted to know if that was something.
It's not
Not now.
Not going to be done in this study.
All right. So at this time, I will ask for a motion for the resolution to direct a public comment.
Mr. Chair, I'll move 2308 on the understanding that one of the efforts in putting it out for public comment is also for public education. So we're getting it out in different formats so the public can see it and then comment on it. It's not just.
Sure.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion. We have a second. Mr. Yakubov.
I have a motion for how long is that comment period? Because remember,
30 days.
Well, we have Christmas. Nobody's paying attention.
Well,
I'm happy.
But I'm saying,
I'm happy.
Under 60 days.
I'm happy to extend it if you would like that.
60 days.
Do 60 days.
Yeah,
I'll
60
accept that.
60 days is fine.
All right. So the current motion on the table is to approve resolution 2308 amended to be a 60-day public comment period. There's a motion. We have a second. Have any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
All right, roll call, please.
Okay, Carly, please.
Yes, so just before I start, there are some alternates here, and City of Fredericksburg gets 3 votes, Stafford County gets 3, Spotsylvania gets 3, representative from Secretary of Transportation 1, and PRTC 1. So I'm only going to call
do those quick.
But yeah.
Thank you.
Those of us who matter.
Jason Graham,
Yes.
Matt Kelly,
Yes.
David Brown,
Yes.
Meg Bomke,
Yes.
Monica Gary,
Yes.
Crystal Vanucci,
Yes.
Tim McLaughlin,
No.
Chris Jakubowski,
Yes.
David Ross.
No.
Marcy Parker,
Yes.
Bob Schneider.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank
All right,
you.
moving on to item 8D, the Interregional Multimodal East-West Mobility Study Transit Report, Phase 2 amended transit report.
This will be quick, I promise you.
Oh, gosh, Ian.
No, I promise you. We have listened to you. We've made the amendments, all of the amendments you asked for, and the expert is right over there to just tell you that, and then we're done.
This should be nothing new.
It's nothing new. We've done
Oh, we make it.
what you thought. But please don't do anything.
Right.
Don't make it new.
Please don't do anything.
There you go.
Fine, spend it with
All right,
very
yeah, as you
rambunctious
noted, this is not something.
grandchildren, 7, 5, and 2.
Quick updates on what we've modified based on your and public comment. So we're gonna go through the three elements of the transit report, and I'm Daryl Smith. The East-West High Capacity Transit Route, the Stafford Downtown Transit Center, and the pedestrian bicycle connections to Spotsylvania and Brook PRE station. So real quick on the high capacity transit update. Essentially, we shared that report with you. That was back in September. We've identified a revised recommendation. I'll show you that on the map. But essentially, this alignment is going to connect Spotsylvania Town Center with the Fredericksburg VRE station, essentially forming this spine where we've seen the highest level of transit ridership potential, both current ridership and potential ridership. And looking at consideration of several priority transit features that can be incorporated on this new spine. So as you've seen this routing very similar before, this is the routing that takes us from VRE using William, going through the University of Washington, through the hospital, serving the hospital directly, then continuing out Cowan to Central Park Boulevard. Again, if you remember, a lot of ridership around the Walmart, and then terminating at the town center rather than continuing out Route 3. We had a set of options that went to the two different park and ride lots on Route 3. This would end everything at the town center. Some real benefits of this: it's a shorter route, which means it's a cheaper operation. It's only 5.8 miles instead of approaching 7 miles one way. We still gain 353,000 annual passengers. It's about 1,200 a day on a weekday. So this is not the highest extensions, but better than the lowest two extensions. So this is really a good place. It is the lowest operating cost per passenger at $5.05 a mile. Also, the capital investment is closer to $5 million instead of the $25 million that you have seen in the earlier options. And so the high capacity transit features, this really focuses on a queue jump at Cowan, Central Park, and Carl B. Silver, that intersection. And then signal priority, which basically is just giving the bus a little bit longer green time to get through the intersection at two additional intersections. And as we know, the routing within the town center itself is still to be determined because there is a number of ongoing development at that development today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Drew to keep things moving on the downtown staff.
So as we mentioned last time, we are looking at a potential location in the vicinity of downtown Stafford for a transit center. And the focus that we got to and what we heard, from FAMPO staff coordination with policy committee members was to look at something that was appropriately sized, not oversized. And otherwise, our recommendation is to look at where we said in the previous meeting, a location in the general vicinity of the existing park and ride that will allow access for a commuter bus to and from north and south, depending on the feature there, allows for flexibility depending whatever happens with Stafford downtown, and provides a variety of potential connection options or local bus connections that might be made into the future. So picking the option with maximal flexibility intended to be something that's optimally sized and priced and not something excessive in that regard. So that's how we've updated on the transit center location.
So it's smaller. It's smaller than what you originally had.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if I, thank you. From what I've gathered in conversations with staff and others, I understand that the parking lot is not big enough to navigate the buses the way they would need to navigate, in that the parking lot would have to be reconfigured.
Correct. There need to be reconfiguration in this area to facilitate bus movements, because bus has a wider turn radius than a typical car. So that would have to be accommodated in this southwest corner here.
How would you do that?
Might just be striping.
Yeah, I would say most transit centers of this type start from a park and ride in a pretty similar context. You might do some work in terms of the grade and the resurfacing to support it among a bus a little bit more. But you can start with striping and some relatively simple curb work, and that's something you've done a lot of.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point. It's striping, and it's not more significant that as you know, if you've been out there, there's a lot of pavement already there. It can be done within the pavement.
Our school bus drivers must be really good because they can navigate that parking lot very well already.
But that should give us the flexibility to not have to do too much.
And one of the things to note, just on that, is school buses do have a better turning radius than transit buses.
Oh, 'cause
Transit buses don't typically go into the neighborhoods.
So if Bob Schneider's bus has to get in there, we just need to make sure it's in turn and it can fit and whatever.
108 or 102 inches wide, I forget.
There you go. Next.
And so then in terms of pedestrian bicycle connections to transit, there were two projects and two refinements. So one is looking at connecting to Spotsylvania VRE station from the north and the south, and then looking at connecting to the Brook VRE station. And so in both cases, we have some clarifications based on the coordination with the TAC and with FAMPO staff. So if we recall, we're looking at the benchmark road corridor, as well as looking in here.
Mills Drive.
There was a easement that we have that runs the back way from near the hospital, right, that we had talked about, and I shared that with Alex, and he said we could look at it.
Yeah, and that is the Brook Road.
It's been added to this report. There it is.
This one here. So this is the line work that Alex provided.
Which you.
Oh.
That's the one you emailed.
We're in
me.
Spotsy first.
Nope, you're good. Thank you.
I just have a question.
Okay, Ms. Hayes, because we're on the Spotsylvania one.
Just going back to the benchmark road.
Sure. Yeah, sorry, I apologize.
So this is the shared use path, right? I don't know how you all are gonna make that work.
Okay.
On one side, there's the train tracks.
Yes.
On the other side, there's houses. You can't, I'm vehemently opposed to any encroachment on somebody's property. And I don't know how that's gonna work. And I don't understand why we can't find another way other than Route 17 and Benchmark to do this. I don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me at all.
So I'll let VHB answer, but they've measured the distances between the train line, between the roadway, the houses, how much space is needed, how much space is there. Also, your Spotsylvania staff have sat on all of these committees and specifically requested this alignment.
Well, I know, well, that was before I was on this board. Not to say that my input has that much weight. However, I live there, and I can tell you this is not the best application for this. And I appreciate we want to have people be able to do multimodal type transportation. I get that. But this to me is just not a good fit. And if you live down there and you traverse those roads on a regular like I do, I don't see how it can work. I don't. Without on Route 17 encroaching on people's land.
Have you seen the diagrams in the report which show the width?
So I mean we've been down there looking at it, and you've got one area where there's a business there that is absolutely going to be impacted, absolutely. And I hate that. And I mean, I realized this was way in place before I, was involved. But I just got to tell you, this would be not good for my constituents at all.
And so
They don't know about it, and they need to know about it because they need to stop it if they want to stop it now.
And so I think, there's sort of perhaps two ways to think about that. One is, without getting into all of the nuances this evening, we take a look at what we think from a pedestrian bicycle planning standpoint, we think we can achieve that's consistent with practice we've seen in other contexts. And then, as this committee is rightly named, there's a policy question of what is the right balance of other types of impacts. And we have looked on both sides, and in the next phase, we would look deeper in the sort of conceptual planning phase of, is the west or the east side more viable for the stacking up of the policy issues? It's something we need another level to quite understand, because as you mentioned, the rail corridor side is complex. The policy and political considerations about the residential side is complex. So what we would propose to do on that is exactly investigate that point. And if we conclude that here's what needs to be done, and this committee determines that that is, and the jurisdiction say that's a bridge too far, well, that's sort of the result of the assessment.
So we are not at the point of choosing this as a project.
Well, whenever this is brought up, I always need to put my opinion out there so that it's not misconstrued as me saying I'm cool with it.
No, no, no.
Because I'm not,
We're-
Yeah, okay.
We're very happy for you to do that, and we
Yeah.
hope that you will continue to be involved.
Absolutely.
So if you approve this for further study, what the plan is that they will do the final stage of the study. Phase 1 was all the background work that we did. Phase 2 was this work that they've done. And the last step, let's call it a phase 3, is to get into that detail, because if we're going to apply for funding, you have to answer those questions. Can it fit next to the train line? And we already have had discussions with the consultant to say, you need to tell us about the width. There's a bridge there. Is the width wide enough? And they're going to draw that. They're going to measure it. They're going to check that actually works. And that's what this last phase is all about. So please, if you've got specific locations where you believe there's a property that is going to be impacted, if you can tell us the location, I'm sure that they will be able to have a look at that specific location.
I can do that, but and this is going out for public comment as well, or no?
No, that's all finished.
We're done with that, okay.
Yes, sorry, Dr. Young.
Thank you.
Real quick, I'm working towards beating Prince William's time. Just kidding.
Never gone this.
Yeah. In terms of bicycle and modalities and all that, I'm hoping that you all are looking at the culture of these areas where when you talk about riding bicycle, if people don't do that, they're not going to use it. Washington, D.C. just abandoned that program that they had for years up in D.C. And there are many more younger people up there riding bikes than down here. My comment was for the VRE. So when you looked at that study, it was only around Brook Station, because I saw on one, if you go back to, it said something about Garrisonville and extending on one of the pictures, you had Garrisonville.
Yeah, so for the transit report, which was about pedestrian bicycle projects to transit, we are looking at from Germanna College and then up and.
But Germanna had moved, now it's on Garrisonville Road, by the way. But so when you talked about Garrisonville, there is a bus system right now that runs, individuals. So I wasn't sure if you were getting the word holistic. If you looked at it, it already exists. There is a bus route that goes from Garrisonville, and so you don't want to chunk it up. It's already there.
There's nothing about Garrisonville Road in the study.
This is
Stafford. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So, right. And so we have, this is the Brook Station project.
Yeah, I just saw when you extended downtown Stafford, it was not.
Oh, in terms of the transit center project?
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically what all we're saying there is what we had drawn here was in, our charge was to figure out the location that would make sense, and our focus was what would give maximal flexibility. So this red here is existing and potential future, depending on which, so
Yeah.
here's the Garrisonville.
Yeah, and when you
So-
said future, I was getting ready to say that it already
So it
exists, there's
includes what
already bus.
exists
Yeah,
as well as what might exist in the future,
Okay.
so we could test, would that location?
okay, I
work?
just wanted you all to know that it's already there.
Can we just finish the two bike presentations and then we can take questions?
Sure, so.
Sorry.
No, I do want to let Mr. Kelly just have one last.
No, we'll wait, but my question is more broad, so.
Okay, all right, then, all right.
Sure.
So, and then, one of the, we heard some good feedback on benchmarking and on the 17 corridor. A key area we already were focused on in terms of the connection is exactly how we get into the station. Getting under Mills Drive here is something that we're evaluating exact dimensions and whether that would be viable in the short term versus continuing benchmark to get into the station from there. So that would be the sort of thing we'd be looking into along the larger corridor. And then on US 17, we look both alongside Mills Drive as well as working over to being alongside Overview Drive to provide a little more separation as we approach the western section here.
To Germana Community College. Yeah. College is very keen on that.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Yes.
On what? On having a bike to get to VRE?
Having bike connections to the university campus.
Well, right, well, we have the Spotsylvania Parkway or the Spotsylvania Avenue extension. They'll take you over to Germana, which are gonna have bike lanes. So that makes more sense. I'm just not sold on the Germana to VRE. Plus, we talked about our projects in 2050, and we're gonna have to tear up all of our bike lanes to extend the roadway.
Well, so one of the ideas in terms of what we'd be looking at is exactly where we slot, particularly the sections, part of why we're looking there, to try not to have that sort of duplicative investment. Go first with the bike and then.
One more. The funding on this, just so everybody understands, it's something that we've been apply for.
Smart girl or whatever, yeah.
Yes.
So just because we have these plans out there doesn't mean we're gonna be spending any money on it.
Nothing's been committed.
Okay.
So then the Stafford to Brook, we had looked initially in 2 different locations, and then we got good feedback on how to connect, from Stafford Hospital and down for the station based on feedback from Stafford County staff. And so this line work here, as we were just talking about, is the exact sort of backside connection that was provided on the north side from Hospital Center Boulevard down toward the Civil War Park.
And that's what the input of the policy committee achieves, right? The first proposal you didn't think was the right one. So you gave us a better one that you think is good. We shared it between the supervisors. They said that, we shared it with the staff of Stafford. They agreed with it. So there it is. It's now in as the official plan.
And it saves money.
There you go.
And then, so where we'll continue to do work, so from Civil War Park, we have it along Mount Hope Church Road coming into Brook Road. Exactly, I think to the larger policy question of how do we make sure that's a safe and successful connection, both whether in road or looking at off road along that corridor there to come into Brook Road Station. Okay, so then.
All right, thank you. All right, so the resolution before us is an adoption of the report. I want to clarify that this is not a commitment to any particular project. It is not an expenditure of any further money. The adoption of the report is nothing more than accepting what has been given to us tonight.
And allowing the consultant to then work on the engineering part to resolve some of those land questions that we just pointed out.
Mr. Chair, I'll move 2307.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Do we have any further discussion? Mr. Kelly.
All the transit talk and the talk in the very beginning about where we're going with roads and new road projects, and we're going to go transit. At some point, Bob, any possibility of getting a presentation from PRTC with regards to, you're already into northern Stafford County and what it would look like for extended service into our area? And I know Fred is finishing their long range plan, and give us a briefing on that. and get DRPT in here about long-range funding opportunity stuff for transit. And because I think we need to have that discussion before we move into any further discussions on where we're going with roads versus transit. Just a thought.
I've also asked the chairman if we could invite the new head DJ, forget his surname, of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority.
Mike? Yeah.
He lives in Fredericksburg, so it's quick and easy for us to ask him to just come and tell us what is BPRA and what do they plan to do for us.
One of the bigger ones for us right now is, if we're going to talk about is transit the next thing that we should be looking at, as opposed to adding all these new projects on, we better have a good sense of, because frankly, we had a long conversation, they're all concerned about projects, but if you total up all the projects, including even what we want to put in for just money that we're supposed to have, and you look how much money we're getting, there's a huge delta. And, you know, that's part of the question too.
Yeah, and I would agree to Mr. McLaughlin's point. It is about the money and to talk about the dollar per people moved, to have that kind of discussion and have Dr. Schneider, Ms. Jackson, and others on.
And I think DRPT, because DRPT needs to be in here, because we've never really had a briefing from DRPT on the funding options and whatever else that they can do.
I would suggest the focus also be on the FredEx component. What are they planning with that?
Yep.
I think that should be the focus for the near term.
So,
because and a lot of this is really tied in with what Fred is doing.
Yes.
And so for us, we're looking at partnering with DRPT for that extension.
So yeah, so
had some preliminary discussions.
Yep.
We've identified when this park and ride lot opens, what would the service look like?
Sure.
We've had those conversations, so it's an easy briefing.
Oh, great. So yeah, however you want to structure it, I think, we'll let you think.
Bob, I only asked one thing, that really focuses on the corridor. If there's anything you can throw in there, if we had a crystal ball and we really wanted to go full bore transit, what would that look like? I'm not putting Fred down in any way, shape, or form. It's just, you guys are in the business of doing it on a regular basis. Fred is not. To be honest, to bring Fred up to that level, we would have a conversation about how Fred is run and who runs it and everything else like that. Because right now it's us in the city and operating some counties. And this has been a conversation for years. Should that conversation be expanded on how Fred is organized and run? If it is truly going to be a regional transit system, then it should be a truly regional transit system and not.
Yes. All right.
I will happily invite those.
All right. So thank you, Mr.
Anyway,
discussion to any further discussion on the motion on the table? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Thank you. Chair, I would like to,
That's for your benefit.
Chairman,
Yes.
if it's okay with the policy committee, I'd like to withdraw the letter to OIB. We've had some discussions between VDOT and ourselves in the last couple of hours, and there is not agreement between staff of the localities and VDOT and our staff on the wording of this letter. So if we could let it stand over, we will bring it back if necessary in January.
All right. That works for me unless there's any objections from the policy committee. Hearing none, moving on to 8F. Oh, sorry.
I would just like to say, I would echo that. I didn't like the way that letter was written. A little harsh.
We'll withdraw and read.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Moving on to the proposed 2023 committee meeting calendar.
Just to point out to all of you that because we have Martin Luther King Day and we have President's Day coming up, not only tonight, but your January and February meetings would occur on public holidays, or some people have holidays, which means that we're suggesting that you move it a week later in January and February, but that will then mean that we do this again in January and again in February, exactly what you've done tonight. So if you agree, if you want it like that, alternatively, we're happy to take a different date if the policy committee feels that these meetings are too long.
Ms. Bonke.
I'll move for approval of that, but I do have an addition. Under the ones where we have duplicate meetings with GWRC and FAMPO, there needs to be a footnote under those because the public in looking at that has no idea what time FAMPO
correct.
meets.
We will add the time.
Right, late.
We will add the time before we publish it on the website, etc.
Right, and there's a couple different places. So.
We'll do that.
All right, do we have a motion to accept the 2023 calendar? We, second, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. Thank you.
I have one last question about this east-west study because we're not finished with it. Do you want the consultant to carry on with those two projects that were suggested by the staff, or is it too premature and you want to revisit it in January? Two projects being that western set of roads in Stafford County and the Mills Drive widening in Spotsylvania County. Those were the two projects. It's either yes, they should carry on working on them.
I would,
Because we have two months over December, or do you want to revisit it in January?
17, I would wait on staff and let them, as one do.
Which one was that again?
It's connecting
The west
Centerport Parkway to Courthouse Road and then
Oh,
connecting
yes.
Centerport Parkway down to
Absolutely.
Enon Road.
Yes, that's the only viable one.
That's the one you want.
Yeah, that's the one we
So,
want.
so do I have permission to ask the consultant to carry on engineering work on that?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right, any correspondence?
Polly?
No.
No
No
correspondence.
Oh,
correspondence.
well, yes, there's.
That's just the letter, which you've had in your pack. I'm sure you've read it. Just about certification. Because of the TMA in Stafford County, we are part of the process of certifying the TRB, the National Planning, the National Capital Region Metropolitan Planning Organization's target setting, etc. We've just got the letter from the Federal Highway to say that they've approved those measures. So we just put the letter for you in your pack. Nothing to do about it, just to note that it's approved.
Perfect. All right, thank you. Any staff and agency?
I've done the staff report in my presentation, so none.
All right. Any chair comments? No. Any board member comments?
No.
All right. At this time, I'll ask for a motion to move into closed session.
You need to read this.
All right, you want me to do it?
One of you.
All right.
That's cheap.
Be a fast.
All right.
Get food for this? How long is this?
Thank
Matthew Kelly.
Yes.
David Brown.
Yes.
Tim McLaughlin.
Aye.
Chris Yakubowski.
Aye.
David Ross.
Aye.
Meg Bonke.
Yes.
Monica Gary.
Yes.
Crystal Zanuck.
Yes.
Matthew Parker.
Yes.
Bob Schneider.
Yes.
We are adjourned. See y'all next year.
Happy New Year, Merry Christmas.
That's the first vice chair.
All right, what else you do?
Very simple.
Great.
Gonna come up with a draft study on electric